Hello and welcome into the Simply the West podcast, where we celebrate hustle, hard work, heroics, and yes, probably all too often, heartache. Blake, Molly, happy October, man. How is it going?
I thought it was going to be a pretty good week. I know the Huskers got blasted, which is fine. I was expecting it. I was hoping for a better result. But every Sunday night, my wife, she boils some hard-boiled eggs. And I know that sounds probably some weird, but she gets like 12 or 13 or Baker's
Well,
dozen
you're
eggs.
prepping for the week.
Yeah,
That's
prepping
uh,
for the week.
that's
You got to
resource.
make it easy. You got to make it easy. And she actually has the one thing that's a little superstitious about her. She actually bases her week. She's like, it's as an omen of how well her eggs peel on Monday morning. So she lets them cool overnight. She peels them Monday morning and gets everything else ready.
They peel
And if
nice
they
and easy.
peel
It's a
bad,
good week. Yeah.
yeah, she's been like on the dot money for like the last 2 or 3 months, and it's been peeling perfectly. This Monday, they did not peel well. And so I'm really worried about this week as a Husker fan, but also it was just a little of a sense of dread. And there's been tons of rain here in Omaha, so maybe that's what the omen was just all the rain and dreariness of the weather. Hoping for a better result on the football field and maybe some better weather. I love fall. I love the smell of it. 55 degrees, slight wind. Ah, beautiful. Can't wait for it. And then we get some Oktoberfest beers coming our way.
No doubt, a lot to look forward to. This is definitely a time of year that's normally in my forecast-based wheelhouse as well, but it's been rather rainy here in the Twin Cities. And, you talk about omens, it's been maybe a bit of an unpredictable football season, not just for the beloved Nebraska Cornhuskers, but in many ways a lot of the rest of the division. So I know your picks that you post on Facebook every week. You're probably hoping to maybe get off the schneid with those as well. But if you believe in the omen of the egg, this kind of sounds like a cheap horror movie from the '80s. Maybe not the best week for you to get off the come there. But in any case, we'll talk about why it might be a good week for Blake and his picks and some of the teams in the Big Ten West, and potentially why it wouldn't be. I wanted to start out today, Blake, with a story about my stats professor from the MBA program that I recently finished. And hear me out here. That's right. I'm talking about a stats professor on a amateur college football podcast. Uh, this stats professor I had, his name was Dr. Ressler. It's one of those people who's kind of like yourself, Blake. They're so smart that it's almost hard to relate to them sometimes and hard to have a conversation with them. I'm sure you get that a lot and
You
and,
know,
and
I did.
difficult to relate.
I don't know if I would be consider myself as really smart, but I did stay at a Holiday Inn Express last night.
See, there you go. It's that quick wit. This guy did not have quick wit, but he was a genius. And this was the first class I took for my master's in business administration at the University of St. Thomas. Go Tommies. It's
Name
BS to
drop.
my yeah, it's BS to my act kicked us out, but that's for another podcast. Um, and this guy was just a genius. First class I ever took, and I remember walking out of the first and second class. I was like, "There's no way I'm getting this graduate degree. This stuff's way over my head." The class got better, but that's not the point of the story. One thing that this stats professor always said, whether you're putting together business forecasts or running regressions or all these things that still flew over my head in that class, and I'm not sure how I passed, he always was very quick to point out that just because you have data or objective evidence from the past, that does not mean it automatically predicts the future. Just because over the past 5 years sales have trended this way does not mean sales in 2020 are going to continue trending that way. There's too many human beings and too many variables to say that with 100% certainty. It's always risky predicting the future based off of the past, but that's what we do in sports, right? We go into a season looking at how a team did last year, how it's trended over time, who it has coming back, and we make assessments based off of that. It's the best we can do. We do it BSing on here. The media does it. Coaches do it to a certain extent. Here's what we've got coming back. Here are the gaps we have to fill, so on and so forth. It all brings us to this juncture of the season. The future does not always resemble the past. That has been the moral of the story so far for me this season. Many wrote off Wisconsin because of the way the Badgers underperformed the last season. We talked about it on our first podcast, and no one's sitting here saying, haha, I told you so. That's not the point. But Wisconsin just wasn't being talked about coming into this season. They definitely are now. Many expected Adrian Martinez going back to the Huskers to have a great year because of how good he looked as a freshman. That hasn't been the case because of a number of variables that we'll get into momentarily. The future does not always resemble the past. We're used to getting, but it can sometimes. We're used to Nebraska getting blown out on the big stage. Saw that this past weekend. Wisconsin's ground and pound identity continues to be a part of what makes the Badgers so good and so tough to deal with. So the future can resemble the past, but it doesn't always. We'll talk about the present. The moral of the story, expect the unexpected. It's good life advice, it's good business advice, and it's good for assessing, where this division is at. If previous data points tell us one thing, it's that anything can happen. It's important in business, like I said, relationships, and of course, collegiate athletics. And I think it's a good segue into the first matchup that we're going to talk about tonight, Blake Molly, which is Nebraska and Northwestern and all the topsy-turvy tilts that this series has taken of late. Let's talk about the Huskers and the Wildcats, how they can rebound from their recent past, knowing that we're probably going to see something this weekend we haven't seen before.
Yeah, which is so funny that you bring that up, but I have a great stat about the past resembling the future. The last 3 seasons, Northwestern is 4-8 in the months of August and September.
It's crazy, isn't it?
And the last 2 months of the season for the past 3 seasons, they're 21-6. That's insane. They have crappy beginning of the year, and then once they hit October, they turn it on. They don't make any problems. Nebraska got completely outclassed by OSU this last weekend. It reminded me a lot of the Texas Tech OU games. Remember like when Texas and Texas Tech played, and Michael Crabtree had that crazy last second catch. 2 weeks later, they played OU, Texas Tech did, and got manhandled. OSU did the same thing to Nebraska. They came out, played man-to-man or quarters coverage across the board, and just said, beat us. We have way better athletes. Our defensive line is going to dominate you. And that's what the game happened. That's how it worked. And you know what? This is the other thing. And we're going to talk about this when we talk about Iowa and Michigan. I'm going to play a little bit of doctor. What do we call it? Gestures doctor or something like that. I can't remember.
Ask Dr. Molly.
Yeah, I'm going to play shrink. The OSU's demeanor on the sidelines, and it looked like they were on a mission, that they were just going to execute. You didn't see hardly any trash talking. They just said, we're going to beat you. They did not seem like they were too high or too low. They were on a mission. And you look at their roster, mostly juniors and seniors, some sophomores and freshmen sprinkled in. It's a very veteran team. It does not look like they're going to have a hiccup this year if they can keep that going. So maybe Ryan Day's kind of cured that. I don't know why Urban Meyer always seemed to have one of those games where he got smashed by somebody lesser from a talent perspective. But, so look for Nebraska to rebound. They're going to pull out some interesting formations, some double wing, as Scott Frost put it. Some I formation came out, he hasn't probably run since Northern Iowa, when he was coaching at Northern Iowa. It should be really interesting to see. I'm looking for it to be a close game. But if Nebraska doesn't turn it over, it could be a bigger win for Nebraska. But the thing is it's in Lincoln, even though 3 out of the last 4 have been won by Northwestern in Lincoln. We'll see. So let's see if Nebraska can do it.
Coming back to the present, I guess if there is one thing we learned from that Nebraska-Ohio State game. And it's interesting. You break down X's and O's, you break down formations, you break down matchups, you break down all these different factors that can impact a football game. Uh, Ohio State is just infinitely more talented than Nebraska right now in terms of where those programs are.
Their
And
quarterbacks
it's
look
and
bigger
it's
than our linebackers.
yeah, it's really not even close. Um, as a Husker fan, I walked away from that game not surprised and really not even insanely disappointed. I think a lot of us said, all right, well, we got another one of those out of the way. We've become all too accustomed to enduring these. Let's try and get back on the horse a new week against a team that the Huskers, at least on paper, match up a lot better with. Nebraska's number 4 in our power rankings this week. Northwestern is number 5. So it'll be a good matchup. 3 p.m. on Fox this Saturday. Again, let's go back to the recent past. Northwestern has won 3 of 4 in Lincoln since the Huskers joined the Big Ten. That's crazy. When you just look at the trajectory and the overall place in the college football pecking order of these two programs, it'd be 4 out of 4 if not for the Ron Kellogg III Hail Mary to Jordan Westerkamp, one of the most famous plays in Husker history. Whatever happened to Ron Kellogg, by the way? Ever see him walking around the mean streets of Omaha, the West Side grad? Well, we'll have to look that one up. He'd be a good guest on the show.
Yeah, he would be. I'd be willing to reach out via LinkedIn. I'll find him.
That'd be awesome. So, something insane always happens in this series. Last year, it was Nebraska blowing a 2-score lead in the fourth quarter. And I think you alluded to it, Blake, and Husker coaches have talked about it this week. And we've talked about it a lot on this podcast, even despite the struggles. Pretty anemic offense for Northwestern. So that provides a lot of hashtag hope for the Nebraska Cornhuskers this week, but they just don't beat themselves. And Nebraska has found a lot of ways to do that. Can't turn the ball over, can't commit silly penalties. You do that, you should be able to maybe handle these guys, but something crazy just always happens. And look, Northwestern is as bad as the offense has been. Defense looked fairly stout, relatively speaking, against Wisconsin this past week. The Badgers number 1 in our power rankings, and rightly so. But it wasn't the cakewalk that we maybe all thought it would be.
Yeah, it was just an odd game. Honestly, it was a rainy game. That's what Northwestern likes to play. They brought it down to crappy levels. And Wisconsin had some really weird mistakes where it had some odd play calling, wasn't really taking advantage of their talent disparity. But you know what? They kept them off schedule. Lots of 3rd and longs. And Jack Cohn, he's a more mobile version of Hornibrook. He's not going to win you games, but he'll help you get over the hump a little bit more.
I was gonna say, is that a compliment, a criticism, something, something somewhere in between?
Well, it's a something in between because you know what, Hornibrook led them to Big Ten championship games.
Sure.
They can win games they can win a lot of games with the Hornibrook style, and add in that mobile development. If they can start putting some stuff out, I actually feel like Wisconsin and Iowa actually have a very similar blueprint. When they think they can win ugly against a team without having to show much, they don't bring hardly any of their packages out. They're probably hiding a ton of stuff for better opponents, especially since you got is playing Ohio State this year. Iowa's got Penn State. Iowa's got Michigan here this week. They've been hiding a lot of their offense, I think, behind these lesser opponents, and it's the frustrating thing that about the how it works nowadays. Even Alabama's doing. They're playing really bad out of conference schedules to stay healthy and to hide a lot of what they want to pull on the better teams. I mean, you're going to see Alabama pulling some stuff out of their hat when they play LSU. I think Wisconsin's doing the same thing when they start playing better teams. Iowa's doing the same thing.
Makes sense. Paul Chryst is a smart guy. Badgers host Kent State this Saturday at 11 a.m. on ESPNU. I'd probably expect to see some of Wisconsin's second and third stringers in that game unless Bucky is looking ahead to what I think could end up being a pretty good matchup against Michigan State the following weekend. Michigan State's defense is very, very solid. So as long as Wisconsin doesn't look ahead, should be a pretty easy game for them in Madison Saturday morning into the early afternoon. Let's talk about Iowa next, number 2 in our power rankings. But before we do, how about we share with the good people of the Simply the West podcast our beer recommendations for this week? What are you drinking tonight, Blake?
I got a Hop Life, or Hop Lift, excuse me, IPA from Third Street Brewing in Minnesota. So,
Oh, yeah.
oh yeah, don't you know? It's really good. I like IPAs, so I'm sticking to it. We got to find one from Illinois. I'm gonna have to go with the 312 beer somewhere or something like that, or Goose Island even.
Yeah, you got the
Is it?
Goose.
Is it nice? Am I right? 312. I can't remember if it's right, but
Yeah, I think 312 is there. There's another one that I can't think of off the top of my head too, but yeah, there's plenty of good craft beer to be had in the Chicago area. It's funny you went with the Minnesota beer. I went with the Nebraska beer, so trading spaces here a little bit. This is a little bit off the wall. This is a Devil's Gap Jalapeno Ale from Kincaid Brewing Company in Broken Bow, Nebraska. Cool little small town on the eastern part of the state. It's interesting. It's kind of like drinking a plate of nachos. It's actually a really smooth beer, and it's got that jalapeno kick finish. It's not the type of beverage that I'd maybe go out of my way to drink, but my dad, shout out to Robert Irvin, is always very good about bringing me obscure Nebraska beers when they come to visit. So, Dad, thank you for being such a good influence. You talk about the weather changing too. Starting to get into October, things are cooling off a little bit. Our YouTube viewers will see my Twins hat I've got going. Playoff baseball starting this week, and they're really excited for that here in the Twin Cities. It's a fun time of year.
I just had an idea what they should start doing for baseball because it's such a long. Okay, playoff baseball, one of the best experiences. Every pitch counts, right? Lots of drama, but you know what? It's slow. I actually think what they need to start thinking about doing is actually maybe turning it into a type of tennis game where you have 3 games at 3 innings apiece, and then that way, and then it's a series of a
Pared
game.
down the series. That's
Yeah,
interesting.
within a day or something like that.
Don't
That
some
way,
youth
each
teams
game
do
matters.
something similar for that? Like you see youth baseball, they'll play 3 games in a day, but maybe they're 5 innings. I don't know. It's been a long time since I played baseball.
I mean,
But
think about that. Then you don't have to worry about the bullpen as much, and you're not trying to get deep into it. It's a new game every time, and you just play best of 3 series every day. I don't know. They need to start thinking about something because I do not watch hardly any regular season baseball. If anything, maybe 1 inning during the season. In the playoffs, though, if it's a team I want to see, I'll watch the whole game. It's so drama filled. Even my wife likes it because she's like, oh my gosh, oh my gosh. It's like on the edge of your seat, like what's gonna happen.
yeah,
But
for
yeah,
3 hours plus, it's
yeah.
exciting. Hey, we're versatile on this show. We can get into pro baseball if we want. It's a fun time of year for sports in general. Pardon me. We're in the thick of college football season. NHL hockey is starting
Basketball
up this
preseason.
week. Basketball preseason. NBA teams are in training camp right now. And obviously MLB playoffs are going on. But there's a very good reason we stick to college football on this podcast. And with that, we will hop back into talking about the vaunted, maybe quietly vaunted Iowa Hawkeyes. They've met expectations this year. Maybe that's the best way to sum up this team. I don't know that they've exceeded them. Maybe you disagree, but they certainly haven't fallen short. And that kind of annoyingly steady Iowa motif has been carried through the first part of this season, I would say.
Yeah, and we've talked about this Big 12 references. I mean, I'm pretty sure that Ferentz and Bill Snyder coached together under Hayden Fry, or at least they crossed paths at that point. They like to have these cupcake schedules at the beginning of the year. I mean, it drives me insane. But guess what? Alabama's doing it. Everybody's doing it because they understand, hey, the more we can hide of our offense and maybe what's funny is that this year they might probably have their best wide receiving core that they've had in recent memory. They're really, really good. And then you got Nate Stanley that can put the ball anywhere. It's just one of those things where I wish I knew how good they really were. I know that they have studs on defense. I know that they're going to have a good offensive line, but at times it's looked porous against lesser competition. It just doesn't make any sense to me why we can't have some better competition at the beginning of the year. It's essentially been preseason for most teams. Now we're starting to see, hey, Iowa's going to be playing Michigan, who had a tough game uh, against Wisconsin. But guess what? Michigan has talent. They can turn it on. If Harbaugh is worth anything, this is a prove it game. This could be a turning point for the Harbaugh era. If they turn it on, this could be spelled trouble. But I like what I'm seeing out of Iowa. I think they've hidden a lot of their offense. They've worked on their passing game. They know they're going to be able to run it on most teams, so they haven't really stuck to it as much. Man, I really like Iowa in this. The only thing that makes me feel a little queasy is that it's in Michigan. So I hope Iowa does its job, but I guess as a Husker fan, I don't, because if you look at Iowa, this is what's crazy. This is why I love the Big Ten West. This is what's crazy. Iowa could lose this weekend. Then they could lose to Penn State, and Nebraska could win this game against, who do we play? Northwestern. We could win this game, and then Minnesota, and they're ahead of Iowa in the
Yeah,
rankings.
2 toss-ups just like that.
Just like
That's what
that.
we talked about, it being so wide open coming into this year. And I want to go back to your point about scheduling. Uh, Big picture across all of college football, that's the way it's going to be until there's some more standardized scheduling practices and setups. There's no motivation for Alabama to play a ninth conference game or to schedule tougher. They're getting to the playoff every single year. The Big Ten has tried to position itself to get into the playoff on an annual basis by going to 9 conference games. That's a double-edged sword, right? Just look at this division we talk about every week. These teams beat each other up. Um, it'd be nice to see some consistency across the board. There's kind of a lack of equality when it comes to scheduling, and we saw it bite the Big Ten last year. Is there anything, Blake, that you think could be done differently? Do you make everybody go to 9 conference games? It illustrates this weird paradigm where the NCAA controls a lot of things, but then it becomes at the mercy of the conference, whether it's scheduling or hiring officials, which we could probably do another episode on Big Ten officiating and how inconsistent it's been the past couple of years. It's this weird dichotomy that we just can't seem to quite get figured out. But are there any solutions in your elite football mind?
Elite football mind again. Well, we'll talk about it at the end of the show, but I think we're going to talk about that fair to play act in California. That could actually be something that spurs on some of the top programs in the top five, and even some of the group of five teams, to put together a league and have a commissioner negotiate TV contracts on that behalf, and then everybody else doing the same thing. And you're going to see maybe some preseason games for those teams that are outside of it. And then the group of five, you'll see some crossover, and then have actually probably a larger playoff, like an 8-team playoff, similar to the NFL. Um, it's a lot's going to change in the terms of the structure with the NFL, with that Fair to Play Act and everything, or with the NCAA. But I don't think you're going to see a ton of shakeup, other than a few maybe smaller schools that have big donors, like an SMU, TCU, maybe even like some Ivy League schools, somebody that wants to put some money towards it and basically say, hey, this is my team. That's the only thing that you're going to see a little different. Everything else is going to pretty much stay the same. Alabama's still going to be up top. It actually might be helpful for Husker fans. They have a rabid fan base. They're going to be able to recruit and pay a lot of players. But then you're going to look at like the Iowa States. It's not as big of a fan base. It might hurt them, but they're still going to be one of the better programs in the country. They're going to probably, and maybe actually be able to recruit maybe some other guys, because they're going to offer better benefits to maybe 10 players instead of all 80 or whatever it is. It'll be really interesting to see. It's going to be a wild west, I think, over the next 10 years, but 15, 20 years down the line, it's going to look a lot like it is now.
Sure. Times they are changing, getting back to the Hawkeyes. We'll see if they continue to stay the course or if their season gets upended against, as you mentioned, a talented but somewhat beleaguered Michigan squad. Really at a crossroads in terms of where that program is at. That one is at 11 a.m. on Fox.
Body
Iowa once
language
again
doctor, real
checking in.
quick. They're the opposite body language of Ohio State. They look,
Michigan is.
yeah, they looked defeated, disinterested, like we don't believe in what we're running on offense. We don't even really like our defense. We're too simple. We're too this. We're too that. They just, and even Harbaugh, he's not exuding this tough nose, we're going to kick your ass
He
standpoint.
just looks stressed out all the time.
He looks stressed and like he's walking on eggshells, like can't bring out his actual personality. And I like Harbaugh. I think he's a really good coach and a good person. But something is wrong. There is something wrong with the culture at Michigan. Let's see if this is a get right game. If they can beat Iowa, no matter if it's at home or not, it could help turn around their season.
We will find out Saturday at 11 a.m. Central Time on Big Fox, that big noon Eastern time kickoff that Fox has been so excited to promote all year this year. Moving on, an interdivisional matchup. Minnesota has moved up to number 3 in our power rankings, while Purdue has dropped to 7th. The Gophers are at Ross-Ade Stadium at 2:30. 2:30 on Big Ten Network. Pardon me, lost track of my notes for a second. Listen, Purdue struggled to begin with. A lot of limitations. We kind of knew that coming into the year. I don't know that I've ever seen a team have its two best players get hurt on the same play, but
Oh,
that
freak.
is
That is so freak.
exactly what happened uh, in that 38-31 loss to Minnesota this past weekend. You can't make it up. Elijah Sindelar, broken clavicle. I'm not a doctor or a shoulder expert, but that doesn't sound like something that you come back from quickly. They haven't ruled him out returning this season. Rondale Moore's
Surprisingly,
injured.
it only takes about a month to heal,
You heal that clavicle.
depending on the extent of how many
Yeah,
breaks and stuff. Yeah.
sure. So we'll see what happens there. Rondale Moore's leg injury is a little more murky, but those two have been definitely ruled out for Penn State this weekend. So we'll see what happens there. Minnesota, somehow they're undefeated. That's why they've moved up in our power rankings. Talk about the past not resembling the future. If I had told you that Tanner Morgan was outperforming that stable of running backs at this point in the year, I think you probably would have told me I was crazy coming into the season. But Tanner, 21 of 22 against Purdue this past Saturday. And Minnesota's really put some focus into practice this week on getting that ground game going because that stable of running backs has struggled quite a bit. I saw a tweet and it kind of took me aback, and it was a simple question. Can you picture a world where Minnesota is 8-0? It's not inconceivable. 2:30 this Saturday. I did misspeak. They play Illinois, not Purdue. That's who they played this past week on BTN. Then you got Nebraska at home, toss-up game. At Rutgers, not a toss-up game. Home versus Maryland. Who knows what Maryland team will show up. At worst, a toss-up game. Then you get into that final gauntlet of Penn State, Iowa, and Wisconsin sandwiched around Northwestern in the second last game of the season. So, can you picture a world, Blake, where Minnesota is 8-0? And what does
I
that look
can. I
like?
mean, the Booger Fleckers are doing some work, and the thing is that the only team that they have that really presents a problem to them a little bit, they play at home, and that's Nebraska. What 2, 3 weeks down the road? Yeah.
2
So
weeks. Week from this Saturday.
yeah.
Prime
So two.
time,
Yeah.
TCF
two
Bank
weeks.
Stadium.
Yep. 2 weeks down the road. They, or I guess 2 games, or one game after this. Yeah. I mean, the thing is that it it's crazy because they should have been kicking their butt with a backup quarterback in, no defense to that's really stopping anybody, and they couldn't run the ball, which I thought that they would be able to do, and for whatever reason they couldn't. But then they threw it all over the place. The backup Zach Plummer, no relation to Jake, came in and played pretty well. but it was really just I don't know what is going on. Minnesota's defense is not looking that great, unfortunately for them. Let's see if Booger Flecker can get it done.
You have a new nickname for PJ Fleck every week. I love it. Purdue hosts Maryland at 11 a.m. on Big Ten Network, and someone you've never heard of is going to have to step up for that team, whether it's
This
Plummer
game could
or
be 65-50, something like that.
yeah, it could turn into an absolute shootout, and Maryland might be the one of the most perplexing teams in the nation the way it started its season and then has performed as of late. So
How about the
we will
last
see
three
what
seasons? They
happens in
beat
that one.
Texas 2 years in a row,
It's
almost
true.
beat Ohio State a year ago, and then they dump on themselves against Temple. What the hell's going on?
That's the theme. The future does not automatically resemble the past. Final team on our list this week, Illinois has moved out of the cellar in our rankings into number 6 in the Big Ten West by default while sitting idle this past weekend. Should be a good game in Minneapolis. Gophers have a bit more depth on both sides of the ball. But you're looking at the Illini's defensive line. Maybe you could give Minnesota some trouble. I agree with you, and I want you to elaborate on this, Blake. We've talked about it a little bit off air, but Minnesota's offensive line, maybe one of the most disappointing units in the division in terms of what the expectations were coming into the year. Folks inside and outside of Minneapolis definitely expected more out of those big boys up front this season.
Yeah, I don't know what's going on. It's really odd. They have a lot of experience. They got a lot of big bodies out there, and they're athletic. But for some reason, they're missing some miscommunications on the line. And guess what? Illinois' D line is really good.
A
They're
lot of
very
talent.
athletic, little undersized, but they're very athletic. They could give them some trouble. And you know what? We talked about this when Illinois played Nebraska. They have a lot of good skill position players. They can break off some big plays. They might not be able to nickel and dime you down a field and sustain a drive, but they can hit 60, 50, 80-yard runs and passes. It could present some trouble. Where's this game played at?
This one will be, I believe it's here in the Twin Cities.
So give them a little bit of credit for the home field advantage, but man, it the, they got to row that boat a little bit harder before I start believing in them as a real 8-0 team. They could a lot, you know what that they could be like the Nebraska that year when they were 7-0 playing against Wisconsin and went into double overtime with Wisconsin. Was it double or just single? I can't remember. Either way, false 8-0.
We'll see what happens. We will see what happens. Moving on back to something Blake brought up a little bit earlier. Every week we kind of pick out a different story of the week to highlight. We're going to tag team it this week. As Blake mentioned, the landscape of college sports, it's been bubbling up to this point, I think, for a while, but set to change dramatically in some way, shape, or form after California passing Senate Bill 206, more commonly referred to as the Fair Pay to Play Act. Try saying that 5 times fast. This is from Sports Illustrated's write-up. Just want to kind of lay out exactly what this is and what it isn't to sort of frame the rest of our discussion. Right off the top, let's get this out there. There's a lot of layers to this. There's a lot of thoughts that Blake and I will share with you on this podcast. This isn't a one and done thing. This is going to evolve. Every state in some way, shape, or form is going to get involved with this. There's the NCAA, which we'll talk about momentarily. But look, there's a lot to this, and I think what you have to guard against is a knee-jerk reaction on any side of things because it's going to evolve, and there's too much money and too many powerful people and too many smart people, frankly, involved for this not to be kind of an ongoing, ever-evolving thing. So California Senate Bill 206, more commonly referred to as the Fair Pay to Play Act, now makes it illegal for California universities to revoke an athlete's scholarship or eligibility for taking money. How's that for a double negative? Under the new law, schools will not pay athletes, but athletes can hire agents to seek out business deals for them. The bill will not go into effect until Jan 1, 2023. So there you go right there. We've got 3.5 years for this thing to evolve before this bill in just one state, that being California, even goes into effect. What this is, Blake, is that athletes can profit off of their image and likeness. That to this point, to the NCAA's ruling, has not been possible. What it
That's why we don't
isn't,
have NCAA football anymore.
which is a huge travesty, and it'd be great to see that come back. What this isn't, though, is schools directly paying athletes, and we need to make that very clear. I know Scott Frost took some flack for some of the comments he made when he was asked about it. I thought that was a little misguided because Scott started talking about the sort of second order down the line effects that this could have and how it could lead to schools maybe being required in some way, shape, or form to pay the athletes directly. And he kind of went off on a tangent about that and was raked across the coals a little bit by national college football reporters saying he's conflating this. And I don't think he was. I think he was looking in the big picture and far into the future, but that's neither here nor there. And I think it raises a good point. It raises a lot of questions. My take on it, one man's opinion, sitting in his kitchen talking to his friend on an amateur digital podcast about college football. You try to look at things through a lens of virtue, and in this case, a lens of justice. That's how lawmakers are looking at it. That's how the business people involved probably should be looking at it from an ethical standpoint. What's just? Justice is kind of defined as giving people their due. And look, this is a capitalist society. We all have a right to work and make a living. So this seems just in a vacuum. When you were in college, you worked for a pharmaceutical company making deliveries around beautiful scenic Atchison, Kansas. I worked all kinds of strange jobs as a student to pay for my fun money on the weekends and gas money to get home to Lincoln for Nebraska games. So why should it be any different for an NCAA Division I athlete? I think is a fair question. But again, it raises a lot of other questions. What kind of second order effects are we not thinking about? One issue that I haven't heard brought up much is how does this affect some of these buzzwords that divide a lot of us and cause a lot of friction and indeed conversation on social media, in bars, at water coolers, on college campuses, and pretty much everywhere else when it comes to hot button issues like diversity and inclusion. And talking about equality, where does Title IX come into this? Or how do you ensure that female athletes, and it's a question. It's not an indictment on anything. It's just a question. How do you ensure that female athletes have the same access to this type of endorsement and profiting off their likeness as men do? How do you enforce that? How do you legislate that? Just look at the women's national soccer team this past year winning the World Cup and basically turning that entire run into a platform for equal pay for women in women's sports. The National Women's Hockey League has done something similar and indeed probably more drastic. Those players have gone on strike because they say they're not being paid enough. And those are questions that are going to face collegiate athletes. And I think it's short-sighted if you just say, yeah, give them opportunities and expect everybody to be able to run amok and it not cause, some of these issues that a lot of people seem to indeed care about these days. What's it going to do to locker rooms? How is it going to be received when, Nate Stanley is raking in 5 figures for the car dealership endorsements he's doing in Iowa City and Des Moines? How is his center going to look at him? Is that going to affect the dynamic? I don't know the answer to that. I suppose it depends on the individual. How does it impact athletic department financial statements? Are the schools paying players directly under this sort of arrangement? Absolutely not. But guess what? Sponsorship is a big piece of the financial pie in athletics. I worked for a professional sports team. I went to conferences and networked with a ton of people in college. Sponsorship's a big piece of the pie that no one really talks about. You go to any stadium, you listen to any broadcast, that is all dollars pouring into the athletic department that local businesses have paid to have their brand represented. Well, when that money starts getting funneled to individual collegiate athletes, it has to be taken from somewhere. So how does it affect the school's ability to market itself and bring in sponsorships, those sorts of things? And
Well,
perhaps the biggest question of all, Blake, how does this force the NCAA's hand? We've seen the NCAA kind of kick this one down the road. They form committees. They talk behind closed doors about what can be done. If you start giving every state the wherewithal to try to decide this on their own, it is going to become a cluster, you know what, and it's going to be even more of a free for all than it already is. You've answered one question, but you've created several more, and it's going to be an ongoing topic. Your thoughts, Mr. Molly?
yeah, I think I mean, the problem is that like some of these everybody has their opinion on how all this stuff works, but really what's going to happen is you're actually going to get some more transparency out of universities about where the money's actually going, because we know what the revenue is for a lot of these public universities, and we can guess even on Notre Dame, who generates a ton of money without a conference. I think Nebraska alone was like 100 million. Michigan was like 120. Ohio State was like 150, and then you got Texas that generated like 200 million dollars. They generate all this revenue, and you're like, okay, so what? I mean, I know you're paying your coach $5 or $7 or $8 million, and out of 83 scholarship players or 85 scholarship players on a rolling average, cost of attendance is anywhere between $13,000 and $30,000,
And rising
and
exponentially.
and rising. But really, there's some wiggle room built into some of these scholarships and stuff like that. And then the question is too, is like, are they employees? Are they really in an advertising role for a university? Are the universities going to have to basically spin off and turn these into clubs, and basically just say, hey, you pay us to use these facility and we'll pay you to advertise our school, and kind of have that type of relationship? We'll get some more. I mean, just like it came out with the women's national soccer team, it comes out that their revenue generation was half the amount as what the men's were. That's the reason why men were getting paid more money, is because they were, even though they were worse, they weren't getting paid it. They were getting paid more because they generated more, and it's all about advertising. Same with the National Women's Hockey League or the WNBA. None of the WNBA teams have ever generated a profit. They always operate at a loss, and yet they still want more money. And I understand everybody wants more money, and I think you should fight for it as much as you possibly can. That's part of capitalism. It's going to raise a ton of questions from that perspective. But I think it will. What I think you're going to see is that first they're going to say, "Hey, image and likeness." Well, then it's just basically like, well, USC can pay guys so much money because they're in LA. They can get into they can make so much more because of their LA connections, and UCLA and all these teams that are in bigger cities. Atlanta, even like you look at Georgia, Atlanta is like Hollywood East. New York City, you might even see Syracuse or some New York, or like Columbia, could have some really big sponsorships, some internships be created. And then it even brings up the question, is like, why are even some of these guys going to school? This is a job now. That's why I was saying the idea of them being spun off as clubs could be really interesting from that perspective. But I want to see more transparency, because I mean, I read a diary from Adrian Martinez about what his day looks like, and it's insane how little of time he actually has. There is no way he could have a job on top of what he's doing, especially. And this was actually a daily diary for spring football. He's not. He has no time for spring football. Imagine what it's like during the season. It's even worse, or even harder to maintain. Um, so yes, you might get a free education, which is a huge plus. No loans when you're coming out, but at the same time, I've known people that had a free education and they were able to work, so they had free money and they didn't have to worry about on top of that, because they could work on the side. This is kind of that whole, and then I think you will see, hey, Pac-12 is going to say everybody can get 10 grand from each school, up to 10 grand. You don't have to pay them 10 grand, but if you want to, 10 grand. That could be used as a bargaining chip. I think that that's probably what's going to end up happening is you're going to start seeing schools and conferences and people bowing out, like university systems that are stressed from a financial perspective. If Nebraska football wasn't as big, Nebraska had a huge bill for education this past year about funding for the university. Most states might just say, "Screw it, we're out of the college football game." And if any big business wants to take it on and use our name and pay us to use our name, great. But we're not going to be paying our players. So you might see some Power Five teams drop out. But then you might see teams. Actually, I was just thinking about this: Wyoming, SMU, TCU, some Ivy League schools, Harvard, Yale. They could all bring back their football programs and be fairly competitive because they have huge donor bases that love football. They really want. I mean, Wyoming really wants to get back into the thick of the college football playoff, and not just playoff, but like in the national conversation, and all they're waiting for is the ability to do it. Now, this might be the opportunity for them to pay their way to get into that. But here's the other thing: I mean, you look at even basketball. I think they've been paying players a lot longer and a lot more because it's a lot easier to tell who's going to go to the NBA. But even then, it's not that great of investment. There's some guys that got paid a lot of money that weren't worth it at all.
Boom
So,
or bust on
so
that
I
side
think
of
you
the
might
equation.
see, like I said, Wild West in the sense of like, hey, pay this quarterback, pay that quarterback. I mean, imagine 2 or 3 years ago, Hunter Johnson from Northwestern, who's has not really shown like a 5-star quarterback. They paid him 50 grand, 100 grand to get him to go to Clemson or whatever. This is conjecture. I'm not saying this happened. Making sure don't clip this. He has not shown that he's that good. This is
Yeah, he
still high
started
school
out at Clemson
football.
and now he's now at Northwestern.
But here's the other thing. Isn't that kind of fair? He did his job. He worked really hard. He's been working really hard, and you paid him. That's the only money he's going to see from a possible profession of football. And then they could probably work out a deal with the schools as, hey, you get a reduced rate on but you can make all this money with the school or with our school name behind you or something like that. You could probably work out some deal to get some sort of classes going or whatever as a
Yeah.
relationship. And I mean, especially because I mean, education is changing. That's what's kind of crazy is that starting to see people. Heck, I have a biology degree. I don't use it. I have a biology degree. My education was on the job. I mean, you have a marketing and mass communications degree. Now you have a master's in business administration. You had one degree. Now you have another. You
Yeah,
use
things
something.
evolve over time. Yeah, you
Yep.
learn by applying what you learn and learning how to learn as much as you do a specific field of study. And here's the other thing that no one's talking about. Colleges in general, four-year colleges in the United States, a lot of them are freaking out right now because the cost of tuition is growing. It's growing at a rate faster than inflation. There's a bubble that's going to burst. There are studies out there saying that a lot of four-year colleges will be closed in the next 10 to 20 years. There's another saying that they're going to have to completely revamp their financial models in order to remain economically viable. That's going to have a trickle-down effect into athletics too. There's a lot that's going to happen. There's a lot that's going to be developed, but the leaders who are in position as this all unfolds in this crazy time we live in have to continue to ask themselves, what's right. We all talk about you have to do what's best for the athletes. You have to do what's best for the athletes. I think I hear people hide behind that sometimes when they really have their own kind of self-absorbed agenda that they're just trying to push of get yours. And I don't know that that's right to use college athletes as a pawn and that type of self-invention mentality that really permeates our country. Yes, get off my lawn, call me whatever nut job you want, but that's real. And um we have to do what's best for the athletes, do what's right, do what's ethical. You talk about Greek philosophy, the golden mean, right? Usually the right thing to do lies between the extremes. You've got one extreme over here where it's keep amateurism under lock and key. We cannot pay these players. They already get a ton. And then you've got this other extreme over here, completely capitalist, give them as much as they can, pay them. They're basically professional athletes anyway. There's a happy medium in here, and the hope is that everybody can work toward it. But one other thing that I want to bring up that I still think cannot get lost in this conversation, and again, call me get off my lawn guy. I don't know if I'm old enough to be labeled that yet or not. Whatever kind of conservative label you want to put on it. When I hear people talk about the value of a college education, that has to be part of this conversation. Dirk Chatelain is a columnist for the Omaha World Herald. I've met Dirk. He's a fantastic writer. Does a really good job.
Even though
But
I
he
hate his
tweeted.
opinions.
he's a fantastic storyteller, and I've looked up to him for a long time in a lot of ways.
He is really
As a
good.
former full-time journalist myself. But he tweeted, when I hear someone say that a college education is enough compensation for a standout athlete, I wonder what that person would say if, in lieu of his next paycheck, his employer gave him a gift certificate for postgraduate classes. I get where he's going with there. The point is he's trying to kind of turn that into, an obsolete argument, but it's kind of a straw man fallacy, in my opinion. Those are two completely different situations Dirk's talking about, and that a lot of people are talking about. One is a student preparing for professional life. That is the point of college. The other is assumedly already educated in some capacity and has leveraged that into a job or career. It's just not a good comparison. Listen, you know what you sign up for when you take a job, and you know what you sign up for when you're a student or a student athlete. So until that paradigm shifts, what gets me is athletes signing up and accepting all the Adidas gear and Nike gear in the world they get, and a free education and free meals every day, and all the perks that come with it. And again, could more be done? Does it need to be just and fair in a capitalist society where people have the right to earn money? Absolutely. But to just throw all the millions of state dollars and donor dollars that get pumped into taking good care of these athletes, to just kind of shove that off to the side for the convenience of promoting the idea of get yours self-absorption, I don't think is healthy. And I really hope that doesn't steer this conversation moving forward.
Yeah, and I completely agree. Like, I think an education is really valuable. It's really difficult to see how, I mean, and certain degrees are more valuable than others. I mean, an engineering degree is more valuable than uh, dance theory, unfortunately. Like, that's just the way it looks. It works in general. And then even there's some degrees that, I mean, you look at, like, I know a guy, we've probably met some people from Benedictine that went and got a religious education degree or a theology degree of some sort, and went and did some great work and were youth ministers. And then they realized, you know what, I need to make more money. Not just that, it kind of burns you out because you have to work very different hours than the rest of the working force. And then they go off, and I actually know a guy. What he did is he took a 6-week coding course and started making double or even triple the salary he was working for the church. And now he's loving what he's doing. And it only took 6 weeks, and it's like almost thinking, oh, I could have just done a 6-week course out of high school and made more money and probably be better off now than what I was if I. But then again, we have my wife and I have this conversation all the time. She has a 4-year degree. She has a teaching degree. She's one of the smartest and like most beautiful women I've ever met in my life. I married her, for God's sakes, and she married me somehow. I don't know how that worked. If anybody's seen my wife, she's way better looking than me.
Outkicked your coverage. I can
But
relate to that.
but we had to pay all this money, and now she's a stay-at-home mom. She didn't have to go to school for this, but we
Sure.
gained very valuable experiences
You
at
learn
the
how to
college.
learn. That's what you do at college. You learn how to learn.
Yeah, but did I need 4 years and $100,000 worth of education to learn that?
Not necessarily.
Not
And
necessarily. And
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 here's
that's
the
kind of where I
other.
think the whole idea of paying for players, hey, give them an opportunity to make some more money. I understand that, but I do think you're right. There is a lot of value in an education.
Right.
and
So why can't we
the
find
year
some
that they
sort
get.
of harmonious balance between both? That's my point.
Yes, yeah. I think you got to go in with an open mind, but I think, and right now it's just all negotiating positions.
Sure. And there's this stigma in our country that people of our generation definitely grew up with, where you're basically not going to be successful if you don't end up with a 4-year degree. I think we're moving away from that, and that's another reason the colleges are freaking out. Just look at exactly what you're talking about, that those coding programs. I see more and more certificates out there, and then the trades. There's a overwhelming job shortage in the trades right now. You go to trade school at a community college and get an apprenticeship, you can start out making 50 grand with very little to no student debt, depending on what type of scholarship money you're able to accrue. We're going to be seeing more and more of that too. How does that impact college athletics? I don't know. We'll see what happens, but we're already seeing it at the
Talk about
very
plumbers. Some
least.
of my wealthiest clients are plumbers.
Yeah, it's unbelievable. So at the very least, we have some stuff to talk about. Uh, some schmucks like us, it gives us a lot to discuss and banter over, and we'll continue to, and hope you will too. Feel
Well, and
free
I
to
might
look
not
us
be a
up.
genius, but I do play one on YouTube. So I mean, let's hope that let's get some pics. People start throwing us some pics on Facebook. See how
Yeah,
people are doing. How people are doing against the spread or do straight up. I don't care. I just want to get some more engagement here from our
make your
audience.
bold predictions. Look at what Blake's putting out every week for his picks. Be sure to catch those on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter as well. Would love to get some more questions. Some of our favorite episodes to do so far have been taking questions from our devoted and loyal listening audience. So hit us up on the socials. We're on YouTube. We're on SoundCloud. You can also check us out on our website. Just Google Simply the West Podcast. Wix, WIX, to make sure that you get that keyword in there. Thanks to Wix for hosting our website for free. And thank you for the time and for listening. Blake, any parting thoughts before we get into another and definitely colder weekend of college football?
All I can say is that I just really hope that I might actually boil on an egg and try and get a good peel this before this game on Saturday.
Get some good mojo going. You've got a little bit of time to do that. For Blake Molly, I'm Phil Irvin. This has been the Simply the West podcast. Cheers and talk to you all very soon.